wish Freddy Krueger would come and chop off your head, and it would roll in the street, and everyone would watch it.
Why are we somehow in the timeline where Hollywood decides to let Fred Durst, of all people, make a terrible movie about autism?
My head and you rattle my head. You rock it like I go to bed.
In 2019, Fred Durst, the lead singer of Limp Bizkit, released an independently produced film starring John Travolta called The Fanatic, about an autistic man living in Hollywood that stalks an actor he likes. Oh boy, do I wish I was making this up. Despite coming out relatively recently, this film not only manages to spread plenty of misinformation on autism as a condition, but also just come off as incredibly hateful towards autistic people and arguably movie fans as a whole. This is a film that seems content to just constantly ridicule its viewer for actually sitting down to watch it.
Yes, me. Everybody in this theater is a giant sucker. Especially you!
Well, you know what, Fred Durst? With scenes like the ones this movie has, there is still much more tolerable moments from this film than anything in The Unbreakable Boy, so there. Somehow this movie also manages to star John Travolta as the main autistic character featured here. That's right, of all people, Vincent from Pulp Fiction and Bolt from Disney starred in an awful movie targeting both autism and movie fandoms back in 2019. So today, I want to discuss why The Fanatic is genuinely an incredibly awful movie, but also how it just straight up villainizes autism, and somehow Fred Durst of all people made this film, and it's apparently somehow based off a real experience he himself had. Not really sure how that works, but alright then. But to start, let's explain exactly how this film came to be and what exactly it's about. In 2018, Fred Durst announced that he teamed up with Quicker Distribution Films to create a film based on a stalker experience that he himself had at some point, and that this film would be starring John Travolta as an autistic character. Two very important things are worth noting here about this. A, the fact that Durst somehow thought this was something worth making a movie on at all, and B, Fred Durst's own personal views on autism. Believe it or not, Fred Durst has actually been interviewed before and openly discussed autism, specifically how people he knows in his family and friend group are autistic. This actually sounds pretty good on the surface until you look at exactly who interviewed him, which is Autism Live, a podcast directly sponsored by Autism Speaks.
What is your take on the whole autism thing? Do you have anybody in your family that's affected? Do you have friends? Are you close to it?
Yeah, actually I have people in my family who've been given or labeled autistic, and I have friends that are autistic with autism.
I mean, are you even surprised at this point? Because, unfortunately, I am not. Inevitably, Fred Durst is a supporter of Autism Speaks and has gone on record thinking autism is a disease that must be cured. But ultimately, somehow that on its own is not even half the problem with this incredibly awful portrayal of autism, and just wildly bad movie overall. So that begs the question, what exactly is The Fanatic about? The Fanatic focuses on an autistic man named Moose who lives in Los Angeles near Hollywood and is clearly a very big fan of movies. Gee, very subtle, guys. In particular, he's a really big fan of an actor named Hunter Dunbar, who is a renowned action and horror film star, apparently. He ends up finding a jacket worn by Hunter at a pawn shop and buys it, hoping that Hunter will sign it. He also convinces his friend, who is a celebrity journalist and photographer, to get him into a film press tour party that he thinks Hunter might be attending. Unfortunately, this turns out to be very much not the case, and Moose is very promptly kicked out of the event. Already, even just in this scene, which happens very early on in the film, you can already see how misguided John Travolta's performance as an autistic person really is in this film, and just how that ultimately permeates throughout the entire production. He's constantly shuffling his feet around, he's always walking really stiffly for some reason, even with his arms plastered to his sides, and he's always talking in the same monotone voice constantly. It is the most textbook, bare-bones, stereotypical performance that John Travolta could have pulled off for this character, and he just totally goes for it. He even rocks up and down whenever he is sitting in a chair. It almost feels like this film's script and actors' notes got a first draft, and then instead of proofreading it, they just went straight into filming. Wow, Fred Durst being cocky and overconfident and choosing to make a film just from one single first draft? I can't believe it! That's never happened before! The issue here is that even though Fred clearly wants to try and win an Oscar for the story of an autistic stalker, since his directing is played completely straight throughout the entirety of this film. The way John Travolta plays the character of Moose just does not allow any of this to be taken seriously.
But let me tell you something, Mr. Dunbar, Mr. Dummy Bar, you have not, I repeat, you have not made the best choice.
He is doing one of the most outrageous, stereotypical performances of an autistic character that I've ever seen, and he completely overdoes every little thing the script tells him to do. Even when the film wants to try and make you take him seriously, you just cannot. As a result, the entire film ends up being unintentionally hilarious. But the flip side to this is, because the film is unintentionally funny, when it does actually try to be funny, it just falls completely flat on its face.
That was hysterical.
Hey, what's the matter? Don't you get it? That's funny.
It's such a poor attempt at any sort of legitimate comedy or actually good writing, which admittedly does seem very typical of Fred Durst at this point. Fortunately, the film more than makes up for it for being wildly unintentionally funny all the way through. This is probably the hardest I've laughed at a movie in a long time, since Deadpool and Wolverine last year, I think, and not for the same reasons that movie made me laugh. If you'd like to see even more content talking about movies in the future, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a specific film, show, or game you think I should cover here on the channel, be sure to join the Discord, where you can suggest topics for me to cover here on YouTube, and join the discussion overall. After failing to get Hunter Dunbar's autograph during the press release event, Moose finds out that Hunter is actually signing autographs at a bar later in the week. Wow, gee Moose, maybe if you just waited a bit, you could have gotten his autograph normally instead of breaking into a press release event. Unfortunately, things don't go quite as planned, and Hunter ends up snapping at Moose for asking for his autograph while having to deal with his ex-wife coming by the event.
How would I sign your face with my fist? That's a collector's item you're not gonna want to take home. Trust me.
Okay, so maybe this is just me, but I don't really think this reaction is validated whatsoever. While I can understand Hunter being mad at Moose, it doesn't really make much sense for him to react this way, since at the end of the day, this event was set up for him to be signing autographs, which from the looks of it is all Moose really wants here. If anything, it would just be easier to sign the autograph to get Moose to leave, but instead he chooses to lash out at him for no real reason at all. After this exchange, Moose goes to his photographer friend and asks her if she knows where Hunter Dunbar lives, and for some reason his friend gives him a direct map to Hunter's house. Somehow, despite already witnessing Moose get thrown out of a press release event that she was attending because he was so upset about Hunter Dunbar not being there, she goes ahead and decides it's a good idea to give Moose the direct location of his house. I don't even know what to say to that. Inevitably, Moose finds Hunter's house and waits outside the gate, hoping Hunter will come by so he can give him a letter that he wrote. Hunter comes by and immediately flips out at Moose again, and also straight up physically assaults him by stabbing him with a Sharpie. This actually is a noticeable problem throughout the entirety of this film. While you think you're supposed to connect or sympathize with Hunter since he's the one being stalked here, you honestly can never feel bad for him in any situation just because he's constantly a total jerk in every scene he's in. But on the other hand, you obviously cannot really sympathize with Moose because he's A, a stalker, and B, well, those mannerisms of his sort of speak for themselves.
Moose is in the house. Moose is in the house. Watch out. Watch out. Here's Moosey.
There is not really a single character in this film that the audience can reasonably latch onto, which is a problem. Neither do the film's autistic protagonist nor its neurotypical protagonist really give us any reasons to connect to them. This is just basic film writing 101. If you want your audience to like your movie, you must create at least one character they can connect to on some level. Unfortunately, Fred Durst in his pursuit of an Oscar seemed to forget about that. Interestingly enough, the character of Moose was supposedly inspired by John Travolta's dead son, who he apparently created the character in memory of. Sadly, no, that is not a joke. I can only imagine his son's immense disappointment from beyond the grave after seeing this film. After having his letter rejected by Hunter, Moose decides to sneak into his house and leave the letter in his backyard while he's away. Unfortunately for Moose, Hunter's yard keeper just so happens to be there as well and sees the letter there. She starts to open it, but Moose jumps out and attempts to stop her from reading it, and somehow ends up straight up killing her in the process. Yes, you heard that right. Somehow we went from 0 to 100 and Moose has now become a murderer. And how does he react, you may ask?
That's a nosebleed. That's bad. That's bad. I had a nosebleed. It wasn't fun.
No, you killed her, you fool! Why are you having this reaction after straight up murdering someone? And then somehow, now having killed this woman, Moose sees this as an opportunity to enter Hunter's house and mess with his stuff. Why? He immediately goes and does the most over-the-top things you can think of while inside the house of his idols, such as using Hunter's toothbrush, banging on his piano, eating food out of his fridge, and also watching his old home movies of him and his ex-wife. He does literally all the first things you would think a stalker might do in this kind of situation. This movie seems to think it's being incredibly out of the box and breaking new ground by making its main stalker character autistic, but this film still falls into a lot of pretty predictable pitfalls that most of these films do ultimately. He's literally just like any other extreme stalker you might see in a film, going as far to sniff Hunter's ears and even take a selfie with him while he's sleeping and kissing him. Except this stalker just rocks a lot back and forth while sitting, apparently. The craziest part about all of this is Fred Durst was so convinced this film was going to net him an Oscar when this was coming out. And that's also a big reason why he cast John Travolta. Part of the reason Travolta was cast as the main autistic character is that Durst thought a film like this could revitalize the actor's career, sort of like what Pulp Fiction did for him back in the 90s. Unfortunately, it looks like it had the opposite effect. After Moose gets a selfie of him kissing Hunter Dunbar while he's sleeping, he ends up leaving Hunter's house in the morning before he wakes up. Hunter is driving his son around in his car later that day, and here's where we get perhaps the most blatant self-promo moment I think I've ever seen in a film from the director.
You okay with some music? You like a little Limp Bizkit? Sure. You like a little biscuit?
Hey guys, did you know that the lead singer of Limp Bizkit made this movie? However, while driving, Hunter sees Moose on the road and almost tries to run him over. Like, okay, sure, Moose has clearly crossed multiple boundaries at this point, but like trying to murder him? Why don't you just call the police like a normal person? Also, how have you not noticed the dead body of your yard keeper in your backyard this whole time? Shouldn't there already be flies and a pretty noticeable stench by now? After outright being called a stalker by Hunter, which, to be honest, I'm not really sure how he didn't call him that before, Moose ends up flying off the handle and seems to finally snap, yelling at Hunter saying he's not a stalker.
I am not a stalker!
Yeah, okay, sure, buddy. Moose is then confronted by his photographer friend when he gets home, who shows him the picture of Moose kissing Hunter Dunbar that apparently Moose decided to upload on social media for some reason. She chastises him for doing so, saying this is something she thinks is very wrong and he could get arrested for. Girl, what? You were the one who gave him the map to Hunter Dunbar's house to begin with. If you hadn't done that, he wouldn't have had the opportunity to even start stalking Hunter to begin with. This honestly just makes the photographer lady, who towards the start of this film actually had some moments of seeming somewhat likable, become once again a character the audience just cannot connect with. Shocker. As a result of this, Moose flips out at her and blocks her on social media, then immediately goes back to Hunter's house, ties him up while he's sleeping, and then dresses up as Jason Voorhees to pretend to kill him so he can prove he's a better actor than Hunter. Yes, this is somehow real. I don't even know exactly where this comes from, let alone how Moose has the time to swap into a Jason Voorhees costume 2 seconds after leaving the room Hunter is in. Hunter is stuck in a very precarious situation, so he tells Moose that if he lets him go, he'll autograph anything he wants, whatever he wants. Inevitably, this causes Moose to release Hunter, and Hunter immediately kicks him down a flight of stairs. But somehow, as if things weren't bad enough, Hunter now decides to shoot off Moose's fingers and also gouge his eye out with a knife he grabs. Why? I understand Hunter defending himself in this situation, but now he just straight up wants to kill Moose apparently for the second time in this movie. I'm beginning to think that Hunter actually has more murderous intentions than Moose at this point. But while he's stabbing Moose, he suddenly stops out of nowhere and lets the door open to let Moose leave. Huh? What in the world are you doing? Why don't you call the police? Why haven't you been calling the police this entire movie? He just lets Moose go off whining and whimpering like he's some kind of dog, and somehow Moose manages to get back to Hollywood Boulevard without completely bleeding out and dying. And this is where perhaps the most bizarre moment in the entire film occurs. While Moose is walking down the street, completely bloodied and beaten, the police show up at Hunter's house and arrest him for thinking he murdered the yard worker, who somehow is still rotting away in his backyard. Every single thing about this is wildly baffling. For starters, how did Hunter never even notice the body in his backyard to begin with? If we're going by this movie's timeline, that body has been there for 3 whole days now. Did he really just never go back to his backyard ever? Secondly, Hunter can easily point to Moose for being the real killer because A, he is a stalker who entered his house multiple times. And assuming he has security cameras installed, he should very easily be able to prove this. And B, Moose has literally uploaded pictures of himself breaking and entering Hunter's mansion to get pictures of him kissing him. Moose has literally implicated himself for this crime. How are the police not even aware of this? Maybe if you called them the first time, Hunter, they wouldn't be arresting you right now. Actually, no, they probably still would be because this movie's director doesn't know how to write scenarios, apparently. And then, after Hunter gets arrested for a crime he didn't commit, Moose's photographer finds Moose bleeding and injured and decides to take him to a hospital. And then the movie ends. No, that's not even a joke. The movie ends right there and the credits roll. What in the world? The movie ends after an hour and a half of our 2 main characters being completely unlikable, with one being extremely over the top and inaccurate caricature of autism, and the other being a wildly mean-spirited and downright bloodthirsty movie star. What were you trying to say with this, Fred? When this movie ended, I almost thought it was going to be a fake-out ending and that something else would happen after the credits, but no, the movie really does just end here. I don't even know what to say to that decision, or really the majority of the decisions made in this film overall. As a whole, The Fanatic is very much not a good movie. It has a blatantly stereotyped autistic character who has his autism straight up villainized by showcasing him as a weird, movie-obsessed stalker who can't leave his favorite film star alone. And it also has an extremely unlikable film star as its secondary protagonist. It also shows John Travolta in what I think many could consider a career-ending performance. His portrayal of an autistic person is wildly offensive, being honestly just as bad as how someone like Maddie Ziegler, when she played the character of Music in Sia's own film about autism, and his mannerisms and dialogue are just abhorrent. Now that being said, is this film as bad as Music? Not by a long shot. You know what the weirdest part about this film is? I actually kind of had a good time watching it. Don't get me wrong, it is not a good movie by any stretch of the imagination, but weirdly enough, that's kind of what makes it a blast to watch. It's almost a perfect bad movie, much like something like The Room. The fact that this completely ridiculous story and ridiculous acting is played totally straight and serious makes this entire film so funny to watch. Like I said before, this is the hardest I have laughed at a movie in a long time. With something like Music or The Unbreakable Boy, I have really only bothered to see those movies once when I reviewed them for the channel, because there's just nothing to gain from sitting through a film like that, because they're just bad. This film is funny bad, and I love it. While it honestly is disappointing to see how far down the toilet John Travolta's career has gone, as weird as it might sound, if this really is the last film he ever makes, then he has gone out on a bang. This was a way better watch than Music or The Unbreakable Boy or Ezra, although at the end of the day, this is still extremely poor autism representation, getting to the point where it's just been straight up villainized. I do hope at some point Hollywood will actually learn to approach autism properly. However, I do enjoy talking about when autism has actually been handled well in film, since, as trite as it might sound, I like liking things. I really just want to talk about movies or media I like overall. Although, obviously, it is important to talk about the negative examples that come with this sort of thing too, to create a real fair discussion. At some point, I want to do a video on Mary and Max, which I consider probably the best autism movie ever made. The next video I likely will be doing is a review of The Accountant 2, which comes out later this week, which I'm actually cautiously optimistic for, seeing as how it seems to be getting some early praise, and I do hope the autism representation in it is handled well. I also want to do a video talking about the duology films Fantasia and Fantasia 2000, which I consider Disney's highest achievement in the medium of artistic expression, and perhaps further down the road, I'd like to talk about each and every Disney Renaissance film in great depth, since I've talked about my love for 90s Disney before, but I haven't really properly dived into each film from that era, I feel. Also, I do want to discuss more anime topics, so stay tuned for videos covering Re:Zero and Mob Psycho 100 down the road. I also have a few game-related videos I plan on putting out this year too, such as the 20th anniversary retrospective on Okami, which is one of my favorite games of all time. Also, I'll probably be reviewing that new animated Predator show when that comes out, and maybe I'll review Marvel's Thunderbolts if you yell at me enough in the comments. That's all the current projects I can think of that I have in the pipeline right now. But, as always, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Once again, if you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe, and comment below if you think this movie is good or not, and if I'm horribly wrong about the Fanatic. Once again, you can join my Discord if you want to suggest things for me to cover here on YouTube, or comment down below as well. You can also check out my letterbox where I review movies and shows, oftentimes movies and shows I won't cover here on YouTube. But for now, I've been Otterly Noah, and I'll see you on the Otter side. Bye!